What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 318. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, not from Denver, but from his hometown of Oakland, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how's California?
California is awesome. I came out a couple days early because there's Grand Prix Oakland, which I'm sure we'll mention in just a couple days from now. And my family is, of course, from Oakland, so I came out to visit them, and it's been fun.
Cool. I'm actually gonna come down there and join you in just a couple of days too. I've been promised a burrito tour.
Yeah. We're not gonna. It's not gonna be an exhaustive one, but
no. I don't think I can take an exhaustive one, but a mere sampling will do for sure. So before we get into what is going to be kind of a newer version of our rule show, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you every week by channelfireball.com, and you can get Oath of the Gatewatch on pre-order right now at channelfireball.com. The way this works is you go to CFB, you put in what you want, booster boxes. You can get actually a bunch of kind of cool different things that CFB puts together in addition to singles. Like one of them's called a booster crate. And it's really cool. You get an Oath of the Gatewatch booster box, which is, come on, that's what you want, right? But also you get a bunch of other cool stuff like a Modern Masters 2015 booster pack, a Cons booster pack, a BFZ booster pack, a Theros, a Conspiracy booster pack. You even get a Channel Fireball life pad and pen. You get a William Huey Jensen token, probably the most important thing in the whole package. You get a couple of spin down life counters, two packages of sleeves, and a deck box, all in one package. It's called a booster crate. And again, you get that Oath of the Gatewatch booster box in there as well. And so they've got some really cool packages that you can pick up. These will all ship on January 22nd. That's on a Friday. Once they're officially able to do so, they'll throw it in the mail and it'll show up at your doorstep. And Luis mentioned a minute ago, we've got GP Oakland coming up on the weekend. GPOakland.com is where you can go to check out, what's going to go on at the GP. But if you can't make it, we certainly hope you'll join us for coverage. That should be a really fun weekend of Standard. Luis, you're going to be in the booth, and me, and William Hugh Jensen as well. So I'm really excited to work with you guys in the booth. Getting, color commentators of your guys' quality is a real treat for me as a play-by-play commentator, and I'm super excited for the weekend. It's also, the first GP of the year. It's been a few weeks since we've been on the road, and I'm pretty excited to get out there. Also, Patreon. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/limitedresources to sign up there. Your contributions go directly to the show, and you can set whatever amount you want. You can change it. You can cancel it. It's completely optional. But you do get some kind of cool perks. One of them is that you have the ability to submit questions for the Patreon question of the week, which brings us to ours for this week from Michael. He says, "Hey, Marshall and Luis, I consider myself an above average drafter, having done pretty well at a few PTQs and regularly winning F&M level drafts. However, one of my biggest struggles continues to be evaluating the board state during combat. I frequently go over what I could have done differently during a game after the fact and find myself catching mistakes where I could have snuck in a few more points of damage or blocked in a more advantageous way. Do either of you have any tips on how to make better attacks and blocks in general, especially when it involves complicated board states? Thanks in advance. I've been listening since the Laux era and appreciate everything you guys do for the MTG community." Thanks for the question, Michael. Luis, anything jump out to your mind about that? It's something that I've noticed that you're actually particularly good at, is processing a large chunk of information in a quick and sort of practical way, where I know that, for me, it's a lot harder than it is for you to just look at a complicated board state with combat like that and just sort it out. You seem to have the numbers just at the front of your brain at all times. How do you do that?
Well, part of it is incremental. So when they have a 3/3 and you have a 2/2, like, clearly you're not attacking. That's just not a good attack. You add another 3/3 to your board, and then maybe all of a sudden, okay, my 3/3 can attack. You add a 4/4, all of a sudden two things can attack, and then maybe they're at a low enough life total that you can attack with all three, because if their 3/3 blocks your 2/2, they take like 7 damage. Mm-hmm. And that's, you don't have to derive everything from the beginning. When, let's say you both have, they have 2 3/3s and you have 2 4/4s, and you've decided, I don't want to attack with either of them because I don't want the double block to happen, and they're at a high enough life. When you add a new creature or they add a new creature, you don't have to solve the whole thing. You just have to solve the differential. You have to solve what's different now that I've added this. That is complex. It's not like that's completely free. But when I look at a board of 5 creatures versus 4 creatures, I don't start from the beginning and think like, all right, how does these interact? It's more like, these didn't all just appear, barring something strange happening, like someone casting Living Death or,
Yeah.
some spell that creates a board state out of nowhere. These presumably showed up about one at a time. And every time a new creature comes into play, I try to reevaluate. And that means that whenever a new creature comes into play, it's not a huge jump to figure out what's going on. We actually did a level up episode, which I'm sure we can put in the show notes, about how to kind of figure out attacks and blocks.
Yes.
Because it is a fairly complicated problem. I basically look for a threshold of value where it's like, at what point is throwing away a creature worth dealing extra damage, or at what point is it worth it for my opponent? So maybe I should worry about them doing that. And again, it's pretty complicated, but mostly it's just trying to, like, step by step, start by assuming your opponent's going to make the best possible decisions, which you can't always do, but I think if you assume that, and you're going to be pretty safe, and kind of go from there. So this is one of the more complicated parts of Magic, but it is not completely impenetrable. Again, you don't have to solve everything from the beginning. You just have to do it piece by piece.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that Michael mentioned in his question goes to the way that I've gone about learning this type of thing, which is something I've mentioned on the show before, in relation to my poker, to playing poker for a living. And, when I was learning how to play, I would always be amazed because people, better players than me would just know, the rough odds, or even getting pretty specific on the odds on certain scenarios. And I'm just like, how do you do that math in your head at the table? It's just like, I don't know anybody that can run those type of numbers in their head like that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I realized that they weren't. What they were doing is they were taking what's a very complex system and they were breaking it down into chunks that they could then understand and remember, and then see the patterns as that particular piece of information popped itself up again. And so I started doing the same thing eventually, where, what I would do is I would take notes on a scenario, and then I would go back and I would run it through a program to tell me what the numbers were. And I would start to see these patterns of like, oh, okay, whenever I have this, this, and this, and they have this, this, and this, then the numbers are about in this range. And at some point, it starts to become second nature to you, and you just know these things, and you can start to, adjust your betting and such. Now, as it applies to Magic, I think that there's a lot of board states that, while they're not exactly specifically the same, they have similar attributes, and you start to see the pattern in those attributes, and so you can start to rule out, well, this isn't the type of attack I like to make because it's reckless, right? Or because it just doesn't give me enough return, or because it gives my opponent too many options. And, Michael said in his question that he goes back and looks at board states and tries to break these things down. And I think that that's the equivalent of what I was doing when I was learning poker, of going back and punching in the things, is saying, he's really putting in the work right now. And what ends up happening is, after he sees himself make the same mistake of missing a couple of points of damage here and there in similar board states, it will click, and he'll be like, the next time I'm playing, he'll say, this is the type of board state that I always miss damage on, right? And I'm going to find that damage this time. And I think that putting in those reps are ultimately what leads to that sort of intuitive thought, that thing where you get to skip doing the heavy lifting of actually counting out the math and working out all the things. And then there are still going to be board states where you need to do that, of course. But I think that, on a lot of the common board states that you see in Limited, you're going to be able to get some shortcuts out of that too. So keep it up, Michael. I think you're actually on the right path. And I know it's a tough one, but I think you're doing it right. Okay. So no Crack-A-Pack this week because we don't have any Oath of the Gatewatch packs yet, but we are looking forward to that set coming out. And this is kind of the first of our ramp up type shows here as we work our way towards the set reviews and such. So this one traditionally was the Rules and Mechanics show, and it will still be the Rules and Mechanics show. It's just we're going to do it a little bit different. I actually put up a post on the subreddit. I mentioned it last week, and I got a lot of really good feedback. Thanks to everybody who commented on that. I read every comment. And, the sort of general take on it that I got, and these things are always fluid. Luis and I are always kind of turning the knobs on these segments and shows and trying to figure out where they're serving, the most use for our audience. But the take was, look, I appreciate the rule show. It's useful information going into the pre-release to have a good grasp on the rules and what's going on with them. But I'm not sure that it needs to be an entire show, because we would go really deep on the rules for the rule show. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try something a little different. this time around. And again, happy to have feedback on it, and we're going to be continually tweaking it until we get it where we want it. But we're going to go over each of the new rules, the new mechanics, and we're going to talk about the rules for them. But we're going to do it in an abbreviated fashion. We're going to hit the high points. We're going to hit the things that you need to know, just sort of flesh out each rule so that we're all on the same page with it when we go into the set reviews and such. But we're also going to take this show to go a little bit deeper on the mechanics. And what I mean by that is, what do we think about them? Right? Like, are they good? Is this a strong mechanic? Is this something that is going to define the format? Is this going to warp the drafts? Are cards with this mechanic a significantly higher premium than ones without? Is this kind of a throwaway mechanic that it's like, okay, it's cool, I get it, but it's not really going to change anything as far as the strength of cards? That kind of stuff is what we're really trying to focus on here.
And I think, as some people probably noticed, I like focusing on the somewhat more practical applications of the rules. Like, I do consider myself fairly well versed in the rules, though not, a high level judge expert by any stretch. But in the rules shows, the earlier ones, I tended to steer us towards things people are actually going to run into, and I'm not as interested in delving into the corner cases that you probably will never see. Yeah. So there are resources if you want to do that. I'm sure there are a lot of people mentioned JudgeCast actually.
Yeah, JudgeCast is one you can go for sure.
As a good place.
That's what they do there. So
yeah, and we're gonna try to focus on but what's your top level understanding of these new rules or these new mechanics, and how are they going to apply to the next set? I mean, we don't have full information about this, but we certainly have more than enough to speculate.
Yeah, and previously, Luis, I would actually try to avoid speculation because I wanted to see it in the cards and get the context going. But I think there is actually room here to make some predictions and take a look at some of these mechanics and figure it out. So let's get into it. I also will note here before we do that after this, and I don't know if it'd line up every time, but definitely for this time, we've got our preview cards, our exclusive limited resources preview cards that we're going to talk about after we do the rules and stuff. And yeah, we'll probably kind of cruise through those. You can find them on the blog on lrcast.com as well if you want to see the pictures, and I put a short take of the cards on there as well. But we'll get a little deeper into it here. I'm not trying to do a full set review, but I did want to get at least our initial thoughts on these cards. So we have those to look forward to after we get into the rules. So let's start off with the colorless mana symbol. A big change for Magic, not quite as big, I think, as some people initially made it out when there was all these cries of the sixth color and kind of crazy stuff like that. But it is an interesting and kind of cool change. Basically, colorless is now differentiated from generic mana. And I think that's kind of the crux of the deal with colorless mana, is that before, if a card cost, 1 and a green, that one, and it still does mean this, by the way, is any color of mana. It doesn't matter where it came from. It can be colorless, it can be blue, red, green, whatever, and you can use it to fill in that one. But colorless mana symbol, which is this sort of diamond looking thing now, is different. It requires that the mana that you pay for that with is colorless, which is weird, right? I mean, when you saw that, were you kind of taken aback?
Yeah, I remember seeing it and thinking wow, this is first of all, it fundamentally changes a lot of cards in Magic. Again, not in a super effective way. Like, now cards like Soul Ring add 2 colorless mana instead of generic mana. Mm-hmm. But I don't think most people know the difference or really will notice the difference. But more, it's like they added a 6th color. I mean, that's what this is. This is essentially a 6th color in that these cards that require specifically colorless mana require you to have sources that add colorless mana, which is closer to a 6th color than anything else.
Yeah, but it's this weird retroactively applied thing, right? Because, now any card that says tap to add 1 colorless to your mana pool, taps to add one of these diamond colorless, which can be used to pay for, certain cards, which we'll see in Oath of the Gatewatch as we go forward. Now, so that's that part. But as it applies to us, well, we know that from Battle for Zendikar, there are lands, Spawning Bed, this type of cards that tap for colorless mana. Now, those would now tap for, specifically colorless mana that you can use to pay for colorless things that happen to be in Oath of the Gatewatch. But there's other ways to pay, because I'm assuming that there's going to be lands in Oath of the Gatewatch that make this colorless mana, and I know for sure one of them is called Wastes. And Wastes is kind of interesting for us limited players. It's a basic land without a basic land type. It's just basic land that taps for colorless mana specifically. Now, normally you'd think, well, these are just terrible, right? I'd rather have one that taps for a color because, hey, I can use it for all my colorless mana anyway. But as we just described, now you can't. So if you want to enable the ability to pay for these spells in the set that cost colorless mana specifically, you can play Wastes. Now, it's a new basic land type. It adds colors to your mana pool, but it doesn't have any land type. So if an effect instructs you to choose a basic land type, you can't choose Wastes. So that probably won't pop up in Limited too much. The other really interesting twist on Wastes is that in Limited, you can only play Wastes if they're in your card pool. So you know how normally you can just, if you play in a limited event, you have access to as many basic lands as you want. These don't count for that. Yes, they do say basic land on them, but you cannot just go over to the land station and grab a bunch of Wastes. You must open them in your sealed pool or pick them out of a booster pack. Like, you have to make it your pick for the pack if you want to have a Waste in your pool. So in your pile. So that's an interesting twist where these are common, Luis. They will be around. You will see them, but like I said, you are going to have to actually dedicate draft picks to these, or hope to open them up in your sealed pool if you're going to want to play them in your deck.
Yeah, and they are mana sources that help cast, the cards of this new color, which are these colorless cards. It's funny since, like you said, this was retroactive. This rules change did apply to a lot of previous cards. So to use the color analogy a little further, it's like the 6 color was there all along, but they only printed cards of that color now, because they only in this set are there cards that require colorless mana to be cast. So,
right.
All previous like artifacts, for example, just use generic mana. And we didn't know the difference because it didn't exist before then, or didn't exist in a meaningful way, but now it kind of does. So what this will mean, and moving on from the rules part to kind of like the strategy part, is when you take a card like that has, this cost is, let's say, 1 C, which means 1 and 1 colorless mana. So two mana total, one of which has to be a colorless mana from like Wastes or Scions or Blighted Lands or Kozilek's Channelers or that sort of thing. When you take a card that costs 1 and a C, it is like you took a card you are going to splash, because you're going to be, let's say, blue-white. But in order to cast this card, you're going to want a couple sources at least of colorless mana. And so any card that has C in its casting cost, you're treating it as kind of like a card of it that you're splashing off color, because you're not going to be main colorless. That does not look likely.
No, I don't think you could. I mean, that's akin to drafting your mana base, right?
Right. So, but the most likely scenario is how you're going to interact with this is you're going to have a couple cards maybe that require C, and you're going to have 3 to 5 sources of that. And what that also means is some of the cards, well, first of all, from Battle for Zendikar and also in Oath of the Gatewatch, that do provide colorless mana have gone up in value. The Battle for Zendikar ones went up in value, and the Oath of the Gatewatch ones are going to be valued partially because they provide colorless mana. Like, again, cards that make Scions, they have a different dimension to them. It's kind of one of the interesting things about the format changing, is that you all of a sudden look at a card like Call the Scions, which is a fairly weak card, partially because green was so bad, but partially just because making 2/1/1s that sack for colorless wasn't a huge draw. But now that is kind of like mana fixing, in the sense that you can now cast your, Kozilek, the Great Distortion, or whatever it is that you're trying to cast.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the question is, and we won't know this yet, but is the payoff there, right? Because this is a cost, right? Like us having to put Wastes in our deck that can't cast our other spells, and maybe playing some cards that we wouldn't be super excited to play before that enables this kind of splash. So the question is, well, what are we getting for it? And that's the big thing I'm looking for as far as colorless mana goes going into the set review is what are the payoffs here, right? Is this worth it? Like, do I really want to spend actual pick on Waste cards, or do I just sort of grab them up, when they're in the last part of the pack, and maybe I run them, maybe I don't? Because not only do they take a booster pack pick away from you, which is important, they also don't make colored mana. And
your mana base gets worse.
Yeah, your mana base gets worse because you are still going to play colored spells, I'm assuming. So
it's like when you're playing blue-white and you're playing 2 colorless cards that you play 2 wastes for. It's like you're playing 2 mountains in your blue-white deck.
Yeah,
essentially.
Yeah, so, that's a great that's a great visualization.
Right. So my initial impression is that if you see a card with a colorless mana cost that is very powerful, you can probably take it. That a single colorless mana cost. The double seems reasonably harder.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Kozilek. But
yeah.
Single colored cards that have 1 C in their casting cost, or 1 instance of C, so just like 2 C or 1 C or 3 C or whatever, don't seem unreasonable to play. Like if like the card that gives +3/-3 as instant for 1 and a C, that is a card that I think you'll often want to splash. It's like splashing a lightning strike or any sort of random deal.
Sure.
And I believe that you're going to be able to pick up enough sources that's not going to be a huge imposition on your deck. I don't know how high you want to draft wastes, because I'm more interested in casting these cards off Channelers and Blighted Lands and Scions, because those don't really cost you that much, because they justify themselves. We played them even before we had any sort of colorless nonsense going on. Wastes are a little sketchier. I could see a lot of decks wanting to play colorless cards, just still not even wanting to play wastes. So I'm not over the moon, thinking about picking wastes or even playing wastes in my deck, even though I could see. I think you're going to. That doesn't seem like a huge statement, but my initial inclination is to say that wastes are not a hugely high important pick, because you're better off. What's higher pick is trying to figure out how to cast these cards without putting wastes in your deck. That seems like part of the trick.
Yes.
Another thing that changed is kind of how Scions play, which this is the part I really like. So before, you wouldn't really attack a 2/1 into a Scion most of the time. Now, you might attack a 2/1 vanilla into a Scion, because you don't know if your opponent needs that Scion to cast a colorless card. Also, if they then decline to trade, then you can start thinking about, well, what if I use this like bad removal spell to kill that Scion? I mean, you probably don't want to do that, but if it's game 2 and you know that they have a powerful colorless card, it's not completely unreasonable to start thinking about that. And the thinking about that part is the interesting part, is that it just adds this dimension to these cards that wasn't there before.
No, it's really cool. I mean, look, think about it like this. Even in Battle for Zendikar, there are times when your opponent, you feel like they're ramping up to something big, and you've considered, well, maybe I should use this removal spell to kill this Scion. Or maybe I should trade off my creature with Scion just so they don't have the amount of mana. Well, now it's not just amount, it's also, the quality of the mana. So, yeah, that's a really cool little wrinkle that I think will pop up, not super frequently, but when it does, I think like all those little things add up to make a good format. The one other thing, talking about, how you justify these type of splashes and such, there's some pretty cool ones that have, like one of the cards I did for the column on a preview, it has an activated ability that costs colorless, right? But its casting cost doesn't.
And that's even an additional dimension, because what that does is it lets you play these cards that are generally worth casting, and you are less worried about activating them than a card like that costs 2 C. If you don't have C, then you just can't cast the card, and it's just a dead card. But a card that costs, say, 2 and a white and has an activation of 3 and a C, you can still cast the card and then play it, and then if you can activate it, it's an additional bonus. So that's another like layer of safety, where you can put these cards in your deck with a couple colorless sources, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. It's the difference between, a card like Processor Assault, the one where you have to process to deal 5 damage, that's just uncastable if you can't process, versus a card like Ruin Processor, which you can cast as a 7-mana 7/8, and if you process it, it's better. But if you don't process it, it's not the end of the world. I can cast that card plenty of times without it. Totally. So, you again, I'm leaning towards wanting to play the cards that don't screw me if I don't have colorless, and the colorless sources that don't screw me if I don't draw colorless cards. Because if I draw a waste and can't cast a double blue spell, that sounds like a disaster.
Yeah, I'm going to be really unhappy with that. Yeah, especially because I do anticipate that the colorless, the actual colorless, mana symbols don't show up that often. I don't know yet. We'll find that out when we get the full set in front of us, but I'm assuming that our decks are still going to be, colored mana symbol heavy.
Yeah, okay. They are. And
go ahead.
My guess is just as a last thought here is that people are going to overvalue wastes because it's a cool new thing, and people are going to put too many colorless cards in their deck. I mean, the cards are the colorless cards I've seen look good and look worth playing, but I'm more on the train of like play like 2 colorless cards and 3 or 4 colorless sources, then just play essentially a 6/6/6 mana base of like I'm playing blue white and I have 5 colorless cards in my deck and I'm playing 3 wastes and 2 other sources where your mana just seems bad on all sides at that point.
Yeah, so we call that the devil's mana base. All right, so our next ability, and by the way, I think Colorless is kind of the headliner for the set. I think it's the one that's going to have the most impact going forward, at least in Magic, just because it's a fundamental change. This next one is called Cohort, and this is kind of an ability that lets allies work together. So what Cohort, I have an example of Munda's Vanguard, which it says Cohort. Now, Cohort's what did we call it? Reminder text?
Ability word, I believe.
Ability word, yeah. The one that's not an actual...
A keyword is, I think, an actual word.
Yeah. So it's just, ability word. It's the one that's in italics that just tells you, hey, we're doing Cohort, which means some amount of, something is going to happen. You have to do something and then you're going to get something for that. And in this case, you tap Munda's Vanguard and tap an untapped ally you control, which that's true of all Cohort. And then you get something. In this case, it says put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, which is pretty powerful, though I will say Munda's Vanguard is a rare. But the key here is that the cost of each Cohort ability is the same. So it's tap this ally and then tap an untapped ally you control. So this is rewarding you for having multiple allies on the battlefield because you do need an additional ally to make this work. But it says that the effects differ wildly. So you have to make sure you read each one carefully. The interesting little interaction here as well is that, so in this case, let's say Munda's Vanguard, which is a creature, it says tap it. So obviously it can't have summoning sickness. You have to wait a turn to do that. But here's the twist is that it says tap an untapped ally you control. Now this is all part of the cost of activating your Cohort ability, right? Well, the neat part is that since the other one is part of a cost and it doesn't require it to tap itself, you can tap an ally that has summoning sickness for the other side of the Cohort. So you can play your ally that has Cohort, for example, pass a turn, it comes back to you, then you can play any ally you want, whether it has Cohort or not, tap your Cohort ally, tap your not Cohort ally right now, or on your opponent's turn or whatever at instant speed, and get the effect right away. And so it's a little weird because the one that's doing it can't have summoning sickness and the one that's being tapped, can have summoning sickness, but that is how it works. So there's a little interplay there about, which one you want to play first. If you're looking to activate your Cohort, make sure you play that one out of your hand first if you have the choice. And that way you can activate it a turn sooner than if you wait. Ability seems fine, right? I don't know.
It's fairly simple. It basically, again, it'll be described on each card individually, like kind of what it does in terms of what effect you're getting. But the general, it's basically like a new take on when you play this ally or play another ally, do this. Mm-hmm. It's now you played this ally, you wait a turn, and then you have another ally in play or play another ally, but then you get to use it every turn. Is the difference? It's a 1-turn delay, and it requires two things. It requires 2 pieces. It requires an ally with Cohort and another ally to use it. I'm assuming all the cards with Cohort are going to be allies because it would be kind of weird otherwise.
Yeah.
But the upside is that it happens every single turn. Like, for example, I mean, again, this is a rare, but giving your whole team ++1 every single turn is a pretty big deal.
It's huge, yeah.
So what this does is it requires more from you than previous abilities, like a card like Tajuru Warcaller.
Yeah, than Rally did.
Right. A card like Tajuru Warcaller was, great when you played it, or another ally, give all your creatures +2/+2. Most of those cards were fairly playable even if you didn't have many other allies in your deck. You would just play them. Cards like this definitely put a pressure on you to have more allies. The upside is that if your opponent doesn't break up the pair, they're presumably going to be in a decent amount of trouble, because even a weak Cohort ability is the fact that you can repeat it every single turn and it looks like at instant speed. I mean, again, they could say as a sorcery, but my guess is that's not going to be the case. Instant speed doing anything over and over again is generally pretty good if it's an ability, even if it's just a marginal ability to begin with.
Yeah, and a couple of things pop out to me. One, it costs no mana, right? You do need to spend the mana to cast the creatures, but the activation of this ability does not cost mana, which is interesting in the sense that you can still develop your board out, do other things, and activate this. Also, it's instant speed, so you can wait to do it on your opponent's turn. Now, the reason I think this is really important is because it allows you to block. If you could only do this at sorcery speed, you would have to tap 2 of your creatures down to get some type of effect, and then you would be defenseless on the blocks. Now, another thing that occurs to me though, Luis, is that allies, at least in my mind, they're all about attacking, right? Like if we go from Battle for Zendikar, like they were trying to beat down, right? Most of the rally triggers helped you in combat. In fact, I think all of them did basically, right? And so they were really encouraging you to play an ally attack with a bunch of stuff, play another ally attack with a bunch of stuff. And kind of that was the whole idea behind making a sweet ally deck. But these are a little weird because, well, obviously you can't attack with them if you're tapping them down for Cohort, and it takes 2 of them just to do it. So, for the most part, you're probably taking yourself in many ways out of combat, which at least for that turn cycle. And then if it's something that you want to repeat turn after turn after turn, you're still not entering combat those turns, or at least attacking those turns. But you can still block and then activate this if that's advantageous for you. But this could represent a little bit of a shift in how we view allies and what they're actually trying to do, depending on how many of these cohort creatures are around. Could just be something that pops up every once in a while and you just sort of take your value when you can get it. But I do find it a little bit at odds with what I would think of from the allies from Battle for Zendikar.
Yeah, I think how good this is going to be more depends on how good the allies are in general. And also intertwined with all this is how good green is. And again, I don't want to get into that whole discussion because we're going to talk about it plenty once we actually have all the facts. But without knowing how good green is, it's a little harder to make a guess. But I assume green's going to be draftable in this set. I think it's an aberration that it wasn't in the last set in Battle for Zendikar. And having all the allies get better or key off each other, my guess is there's an allies deck, and I guess his cohort's going to be good.
Okay. Yeah. I love the fact that it costs no mana. That really kind of stands out to me as like this ability of just like end step Cohort, play another creature, Cohort on your turn again. And it feels like you could really grind it out. All right. That brings us to our next new mechanic. It's called support. And this is kind of it's a more of a general type of thing. Like it doesn't require, allies or anything like that. And basically, support comes with a number attached to it. So for example, support 2, support 6, and that 2 in this case is how many +1/+1 counters you get to put on each of up to 2 targets. So support 6 would say put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 6 other target creatures if it's on a creature, and if it's on a spell, it's just up to 2 targets or up to 6 targets.
Yeah. Creatures with support cannot support themselves.
Yeah, and that's a big deal, right? So that's one of the big hangups. There's a couple of sort of catch-alls. So I'll give you an example of one, Luis. Some creatures have the ability that says, when card name enters the battlefield, support something. So, for example, there's one called Gladeheart Cavalry, and I won't get into the details of it, but it says, when Gladeheart Cavalry enters a battlefield, support 6, which is huge. This one's also a rare. But, you can imagine a smaller version of this at common or uncommon or something. And it says, so support says, again, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 6 other target creatures. Now, to break this down, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, what Luis just said, absolutely true. Other target creatures means you do not get to support onto itself. So it is just a 6/6 in this case, and it's not getting an additional counter. The other thing is the up to means that no, you do not need 6 targets for this support to happen. You can have anywhere between 1 and 6 to make the support happen. If you have 0, just nothing happens. There's no other targets and it won't happen. The other thing to keep in mind is that the +1/+1 counters, each creature gets 1, and you do not get the ability to stack them how you want. You can't say, well, I'll put all 6 on one creature, I'll put 3 and 3. It doesn't work like that. Support is just a +1/+1 counter on up to 6 other target creatures. So, keep that in mind when you go to the pre-release, that because you might have an opponent or something who doesn't listen to the show or doesn't read up on this stuff and just start, piling counters. I'll support 6 onto this 2/2. Now it's an 8/8. I'll attack you. That it doesn't work that way. You can only do 1 +1/+1 counter for a creature for support. Pretty straightforward mechanic other than that.
It is. It's the sort of thing where it's going to pay you if you have the large number of supports for having a bunch of tokens. It's not clear yet how many creatures or spells will have numbers like 4 to 6, because I expect those to be on the higher rarity cards. Mm-hmm. But even if you had, let's say, a card like a 2/2 support 1, which seems like a very plausible card, it's gonna reward you for having a high creature density. You're gonna want a lot of creatures in your deck, because missing out on support triggers seems like you're losing a decent amount of value, because that's kind of a big part of why you're playing these specific cards. It's not all that complicated, though. It just means play some creatures to get this bonus. So we're not looking at something like a token theme where you have, or a counter-based theme where once you have counters on these creatures, they have extra abilities or anything like that. That was something that we saw more often in previous sets that had a heavier theme based on counters. Mm-hmm. So it's more like, you're going to want a bunch of creatures and you're going to want to give them +1/+1 counters. If you want, you can give your opponent's creatures +1/+1 counters. Smite the Monstrous is the biggest reason to do that, I guess. Maybe you're going to steal their creature with Exert Influence, so you would do that too. But for the most part, you're just going to put counters on your own creatures, and you're going to want to have enough creatures. Also, if we see instant speed support, which seems completely plausible, then it's a little more dangerous to get your 3/3 into a fight with their 2/3, because +1/+1 might be a kind of like, a flashpoint for a combat trick here.
Yeah, and in fact, we actually have seen instant speed support. One of the cards that, again, I previewed in a column for last week is called Jiraga Auxiliary, and it's 1 green-white for a 2/3 elf soldier ally at uncommon, and it has 4 green-white, support 2. So you pay 6 mana to support 2, and you can do it whenever you want. So, that's a good example of a nice mana sink, going late in the game, and a good example of what you just mentioned, which is the instant speed ability. Because now combat's just a nightmare, right? You can put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 other target creatures. And again, I want to reiterate, it's other, like even on Jiraga Auxiliary, this uncommon, they don't support themselves, they support other things. That's the whole point of the mechanic, is that it's supposed to be flavorfully, the allies coming together and helping each other out. And so this is these creatures helping other creatures out. So, we do have instant speed. You'll want to keep an eye on that as well. For the most part, this ability seems strong. I think that people tend to generally underrate the power of a +1/+1 counter on their creature. Particularly, I am going to have my eye open for cards that don't cost mana like that. Like, that's a late game mana sink that I think you can dump a bunch of mana into and be pretty happy with. But, cards like this Gladeheart Cavalry, the one that when it enters the battlefield, you get to just support. That's the kind of stuff I'm really looking for out of my support cards, because that type of ability can be really, really strong. If you can play on curve and have like a nice creature curve out, it can really reward you, making your creatures trump theirs, at least for a turn or two. So I think support's fine. It's not flashy. This isn't the kind of mechanic that, you go, oh my God, and, start text messaging your friends about or whatever, but it's something that, you don't want to overlook either.
Yeah, it is funny that flavorfully this is the allies, battling the Eldrazi, but like all the ally abilities, they tend to work pretty well with all the Eldrazi scions. So
yeah. Yeah. All right. So we got one more. It's called Surge, and it's pretty straightforward. It's a new ability that lets you cast spells for an alternative cost if you, and this is a little tricky, we'll talk about it in a minute, or a teammate has already cast a spell during the turn. So basically what happens is a spell will have its own normal mana cost, just like normal, and you'll get an effect for it, whatever it is. But it will also have a surge cost, and the surge cost will be spelled out for you on the card. So as an example, I have a card called Comparative Analysis. It's 3 and a blue for an instant. It's common, and it says target player draws 2 cards. Cool. Its surge cost is 2 and a blue. So again, the way to satisfy this is by casting another spell during this turn. Now,
or have a teammate do so.
Or have a teammate do so. So let's just get that out of the way right now. Teammate, for our purposes, is for two-headed giant, right? It's when you're playing two-headed giant, if your other head casts a spell, that's going to satisfy the requirements for Surge. But for
not for team limited or like
no.
Or you and your buddies are a team and you're all drafting in the same draft.
No, and you can't say, "Hey, Paul, did you cast a spell yet?" Yeah. So, really, it's kind of a minor thing. The teammate thing kind of stands out as like, whoa, but really, it's just for two-headed giant for limited purposes. I mean, there's, arch enemy and a few other things that pop up, but for us, limited players, it's for two-headed giant. But again, the vast majority of limited matches that are played are not two-headed giants, so it means it's going to be on you to cast another spell. Now, what does that mean? What does casting another spell this turn mean? Well, it just means basically put another spell in the stack, from your hand. It basically says it doesn't care if it gets countered, right? It doesn't matter if it resolves. It could even still be on the stack, like in the case of comparative analysis. And that surge cost will have been met, that surge requirement, and now you can pay it for its lesser cost. Now, one of the other cool things about surge is that it's not just about lowering the cost, although there are some that are just like that. Like the one I just read you, comparative analysis, costs 4 mana normally. If you cast another spell this turn, it costs 3. So, that one is just a cost reduction. But there are some spells that we'll look out for as well that give you a bonus, right? You can get an additional effect out of it if you've met the requirement for surge cost and you pay the surge cost for it. If that happens, then sometimes you'll get a bonus. Like on this, maybe it'd say draw 3 cards instead, or, your opponent discards a card or whatever. They can tack on whatever they want. And so some of them are going to be just cheaper and some of them are going to be cheaper, but with also additional stuff. So, it's a tricky little thing, right? It's a little weird, but ultimately, it's pretty straightforward. You just have to cast a spell.
Surge is pretty funny. It's for the most part it's like a incidental bonus. Like you're gonna have let's say comparative analysis is worth playing because I really hope it is. But let's say it's worth playing for 4 mana draw 2. You put this card in your deck, and then sometimes on like turn 9, you're gonna cast a spell and realize you can just surge and save a mana. Great. You did it.
Yeah, you broke it.
But other cards, like for example, the Tyrant of Valakut or Crush of Tentacles, which have a specific text that say, if its surge cost was paid, do this cool thing. Put an 8/8 into play, deal 3 damage to target creature or player, or whatever. You then have to do a little bit more work, and you also care more. So when it comes to that, first of all, I don't think there's going to be a surge deck. We're looking at some of these mechanics. There's definitely going to be a cohort deck. Wastes, are going to be fairly impactful. Surge is the sort of thing where I would expect to see the additional text on surge cards be mostly at rare, if not completely at rare. Whereas you're going to see some cost reductions at common and uncommon. And what that means is you're not going to be drafting some kind of storm deck, right, where you're just trying to play a bunch of 0 and 1 mana spells and enable surge. That's just not how limited games are going to be. What it does mean, though, is that if you have a card like Tyrant of Valakut or Crush of Tentacles in your deck or whatever other powerful surge triggers there are, sometimes you'll play an extra 1 mana spell that you wouldn't have necessarily played, or you'll draw a 1 or 2 mana spell and choose not to play it because you're trying to set up a good turn with surge. And that's something you have to keep in mind. It's more like on an individual level, if you have these cards, because these cards, a lot of them are going to be perfectly playable even if you don't reliably get surge, then you will play your games and build your deck in a way to take advantage of them. So it's certainly something you have to learn. It certainly impacts your experience with this format, but it's also not the sort of thing you're going to move all in on. You're not going to first pick a surge card and then second pick a bad 1 mana card because it's worth getting it going. There have been mechanics in the past that rewarded you for that, like in original Mirrodin, which we're actually going to see as a flashback draft pretty soon here. Affinity was such a powerful mechanic that you would play 1 mana artifacts that did nothing. That actually was a thing. But Surge is not on that level. You're not playing 0 and 1 mana spells that do nothing just to get Surge going. So it's something you should be aware of and something you should play into, but it's not something you're probably going to move all in on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's one that's, I'm viewing it as a bonus. You know, like the surge, like I think I'm going to be leaning on the not surge cost really hard during the set review and kind of saying, look, would I play comparative analysis if it didn't say surge on it? And that'll probably be closer to my baseline than anything because, I mean, yeah, I could see a turn 5 where I play a 2-drop and then a comparative analysis and think that's a pretty reasonable turn right there. I don't know that I'm really breaking it wide open though, and I assume that most of the time I'm going to be paying my 4 mana for comparative analysis, and it's not super efficient or whatever. So, all right, so that actually does it, Luis, for the new mechanics. This is a set that we're going to be carrying over a few others, and we get these ones too. So I don't know. Nothing really jumps out to me as far as strategic stuff until we get more of the cards in our hands. From a big picture. But like I said, I think the colorless mana symbol is kind of the most in your face change. I think that support is going to be the most underrated just because it's the least flashy. But, you can win a lot of games of Magic by playing a bunch of creatures and making them a bit bigger than your opponents. And then Surge looks like something that I'm curious to see maybe for Constructed, what some of the cards come out for that. And I know we're going to have playable cards that have Surge and Limited as well. But, Constructed seems to be the place where you can kind of break these type of things, these, this dangerous area where they reduce the mana cost on cards a lot. And I think it'll be a little tougher to really break that for Limited.
I'm most interested in playing with the colorless cards because I like splashing in general, and figuring out good ways to splash is good. So wastes are interesting to me in that regard. And then the support cards, because they not only reward you for drafting around them, they look like they'll breathe a new life into the kind of ally archetypes. Whereas the Surge and Cohort is what I meant, not support. Surge and support both are cool, but they're kind of straightforward. They're just what they say on the card. You're probably not gonna contort your deck around, to take advantage of them. Whereas the Cohort cards actually do reward you for planning ahead and figuring out a good deck. And those are the abilities that interest me the most.
All right, so we'll be keeping an eye on those as we move towards the set review. But we've got one more thing to talk about here before we head out for the day. We've got our exclusive Oath of the Gatewatch Limited Resources preview cards. All right, so let's just jump right into these, Luis. We're going to be going over these in full depth on the set review, but I figured we'd just sort of touch base, read them, and just get initial reactions to them here. Our first one is called Baloth Null. It's 4 black-green for a 4/5 zombie beast. By the way, these are all uncommon and they're all gold cards. They're enemy colored,
which is apparently the LR preview niche.
Yeah, I love it because these are sweet. We got 5 of them, by the way. So it says when Baloth Null enters the battlefield, return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand.
I am in.
Yeah, I jokingly wrote that they've been trying to get us to play Dutiful Return for a long time, and now they finally found a place that will do it.
It's like a Dutiful Return, except you pay 1 and a green extra to get a 4/5.
To get a 4/5 body, right. Yeah, so this is like the type of card that doesn't actually fit anywhere, right? It's a zombie beast, like it's not an ally, it's not colorless. But holy hell, that's a 3-for-1 if you can set it. It's like a clunky 3-for-1, right?
Yeah, but it's not even that clunky. 6 mana 4/5 is not that far behind like 5 mana 4/5, which is a card I've played often. Mm-hmm. So I really like this card. It's gonna, in some ways, enable the black-green sacrifice deck, which hopefully is more of a thing now. And other ways, it's just a card I can definitely see splashing this card. This is a card I'll play off like an Evolving Wilds and a Pilgrim's Eye in my like blue-black deck. It's so powerful. You just play this and I don't know. I don't see anything wrong with this card.
Yeah, I mean, the one caution I have is just...
No, there's nothing wrong with it.
You sometimes will not have 2 creatures in your yard. You can get up to 2, so even if there's only 1, you can get it back. But yeah, I mean...
1 is good.
Yeah, totally. It's totally... Like, that's the thing, is that when you put it in that context, you're like, hey, it's only a 2-for-1, though. It's like, wait, so it's a 3-for-1 normally? It's like, yeah, it is. And it's a board affecting, really good blocking 3-for-1.
Yeah, you don't get behind when you cast this.
Yeah.
So it holds the fort, and then it gives you time to utilize the fact that you just got 2 extra cards.
Yeah. No, I think Baloth Null is really cool.
This is just the black-green Mull Drifter.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay.
Baloth Null Drifter.
Well, now we know what we're calling that guy. Cliffhaven Vampire is next. It's 2 white, black for a 2/4 flying. It's a vampire warrior ally. Again, uncommon. These are all uncommons. And it says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life.
Yeah, I can be bribed to play Defiant Bloodlord. That's the 7 mana 4/5 flyer that whenever you gain life, they lose that much life. This is a smaller uncommon version of it, but 4 mana 2/4 flyer. You'll just always play this card if you're black white. I'm not splashing for this card, and because the draining is capped at 1, it's again just a constant 1 for every instance of life gain. I'm not all that interested in building around it. I'm just going to play this card in my black white decks. Ability is going to happen sometimes, and overall it's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, it's kind of cool too that they made it such high toughness. It's a 2/4 with flying, so it's actually quite a good blocker. And I have the feeling that at least if things continue along the trend they did from Battle for Zendikar, that you'll end up with a few incidental, repeatable life gain effects like a Stonehaven Medic or cards like that. And then this thing, your opponent can't just sit there forever, and it's pretty tough to attack through this thing too if you have any good removal. So yeah, Cliffhaven Vampire is cool. This next one looks really powerful to me. I don't know how great it's going to be in limited. Certainly playable though. It's a blue-red. Oh, sorry. It's called Storm Chaser Mage. It's blue-red for a 1/3 with flying and haste and prowess. And by the way, there's prowess. What do you? I
like
here?
It. Yeah. I'm always a fan of prowess, and I love drafting the blue-red decks. Where this will fit in is not clear yet. This is very clearly a surge enabler. It even looks like it's surging right on the card because it's cheap. You play a Stormhaven Mage, and then you play your Surge card, and then you attack for 2. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that is nice.
This looks like more of a constructed plant. I mean, this is a flying Monastery Swiftspear for an extra blue mana, essentially. And could be kind of interesting there. But for limited 2 mana 1/3 flyer, I've always liked that set of stats. That card has shown up as a white card in a number of sets, just 1 and a white for a 1/3 flyer. Mm-hmm. And I'm a fan. So giving it prowess is pretty significant. And giving it haste is not unreasonable either. So I don't think you need to build around this card to make it good. I think you're going to end up playing it if you're blue-red most of the time.
Yeah, that was my take on it too, that you'll occasionally trigger prowess and be happy about it, but you don't need to build a prowess type deck. It's kind of weird seeing prowess here though, right? It's evergreen now, I guess?
Yeah, it's evergreen, so it's just going to pop up every now and then.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, I guess. I really like this next. This is probably my favorite of the bunch. It's called Void Grafter is next. It's 1 green-blue for a 2/4 Eldrazi drone, which, yes, means it's devoid. It's got flash, so 2/4 flash for 3 mana. I like that. And then it's got an extra ability that says, when it enters the battlefield, another target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. And it's kind of interesting because that's you read that and you're like, oh, wow. And that's kind of like the big chunk of text in the rules box or whatever. But I also think it's the least important probably. If you get to flash this in and save your creature, hey, thumbs up. I mean, that is fantastic. And that will happen sometimes too. But I also see, using Void Grafter as a surprise blocker just as often, if not more, to flash in and block somebody's attacker. Or maybe team up with another one of your creatures to double block a big attacker. Also, you can just develop your board, in kind of a sneaky way, leave up counter spells, leave up stuff like that. And all of that, doesn't equal a card that's amazing, but it does equal a really solid card. And I think Void Grafter is really cool.
Yeah, I really like Void Grafter. It has a lot of outs to 2/4 on your opponent.
Yeah.
You just leave your mana up. If they play a sorcery speed removal spell on their turn, then you get to counter it, and that's just a huge blowout. If they attack with a 2/2 or a 3/2, you get to eat it for free. And worst comes first, like you said, you just run it out. Also, 3 mana for a 2/4 is not a heinously bad deal.
Not at all.
I think everything about this card just looks like value. It's just a lot of incremental value in a lot of places. This card's going to be very good.
Oh yeah, it's just dripping with value, which is one of the reasons why I love it. Yeah, I think this guy's just super cool. Although, does he not have a head? Is that true?
I have no idea.
You can't see it, can you? All right. Well,
I mean, I can see the art. I just don't know what's going on.
Okay. Yeah, I don't either. Maybe somebody will figure it out. But
he's grafting ahead.
Yeah, he's cool. He also reminds me of a fake card that Rashad BDM and I made called Noble Ox. Which is that's for a fake unset that we were making. The joke being no blocks, and so I'm thinking Void Grafter is the R&D version of Noble Ox, which makes me very happy. Last is Weapons Trainer. red white for a 3/2 human soldier ally. And it just says real simple. Other creatures you control get +1/+0 as long as you control an equipment.
This card's kind of weird.
It's a weird one, right?
First of all, we haven't had any good equipment so far. No. I think all the equipment in Battle for Zendikar is just really bad. I mean, Slimehammer is decent.
I was like, I generously described it as lackluster in the little blurb I wrote about the card on the blog, the equipment.
But 2-mana 3/2 is certainly fine, especially it is an ally. Another thing to take a look at, which is true of also the vampire that we just previewed, the Cliffhaven. If we see good equipment here in Oath, then 2-mana 3/2, all your other creatures get +1/+0 is a pretty solid card. It's kind of like it promotes the same kind of token-based strategies that a lot of the allies seem to promote. So I'm less excited about this because I don't like red-white and I don't like playing equipment and I don't like playing allies. So otherwise, I love the card.
I like how it's right after Void Grafter too, right? Like just attack with my weapons trainer, Void Grafter block. I don't know. I feel the same way. When I looked at this card and I read it all out, look, there's some powerful stuff happening here. It doesn't really ask a lot of you. The equipment doesn't even have to be equipped. It just has to be laying around somewhere on the battlefield on your side. But I'm so just turned off of red white and that whole. I don't remember the last time I drafted red white.
Okay, how about this? You can draft the weapons trainer deck, and I'll draft the kind of Sultai, Bailoff, Null, Void Grafter deck.
Yeah, see, I'm just so in your camp on that. So yeah, so weapons trainer, not perhaps our favorite on the show, but if you're into beating down, the card has good stats and a reasonable upside that doesn't ask you for too much. All right, so that's it. Those are our 5 preview cards for LR. Some really fun ones. These are kind of just whetting my appetite for more here.
More weapons trainers.
Yeah, no. I was thinking a little more along the lines of what you described.
Or Null Drifters.
Yeah. Bailoff Null Drifter. That is too good, dude. I'm telling you are a highly talented individual. Well, that is going to do it though for the show this week. Again, any feedback is welcomed. We're still kind of forming the show around the rules and mechanics. But I think that the shorter version is a little bit more efficient than the full long form version of the show. And I think it's just a little bit better use of time, but it does give us some more room to talk about speculation and to talk about the mechanics and what we think about them. Maybe give some strategic stuff like we did here, and we'll continue kind of down that path. But if you have any suggestions on what you'd like to see, ideally, the subreddit, on the LRcast subreddit on Reddit is a good place to do it. You can also find us on Twitter, where we are Marshall_LR for me and LSV for him. Also, you can send us an email if you'd like. Though I will say that the best way to get a hold of us is through Twitter or on the Reddit, just because it's more digestible. Sometimes the emails can get pretty long, but we don't mind getting them either. That's lr@lrcast.com if it won't fit in a tweet. I also want to remind you that the show is brought to you by channelfireball.com. So make sure you head over there to get your Oath of the Gatewatch pre-orders going. Again, singles, right? If there's certain cards you need for your Canadian Highlander deck or for your standard deck, you can get those sorted out right away. Or like I mentioned before, you can get a booster box or some type of combo deal as well, where you get a booster plus a bunch of other cool stuff. And you can get those pre-ordered. And all you do is put in the pre-order and then you're done. And they ship it to you the day that they're allowed to. Those are going to be in the mail and on their way to you. So you're going to get it ASAP. And I got to say that is the easy way to go, man. You just go on CFB, get it ordered up, and sit back and wait for it to arrive. And I think that's a good plan for getting your Oath of the Gatewatch. Hopefully, we'll see some of you at GP Oakland this weekend. We had a question in the subreddit regarding that about coming up to say hi, since Luis and I are doing coverage. They were wondering, well, are you guys are we allowed to come up and say hi while you guys are doing coverage? And well, when we're on the air, we can't talk, but any other time we can. Feel free to come up and say hi. Luis and I are always happy to meet listeners and have a quick chat with you. So please do that. We love it. That will do it for the show this week, though. Big stuff coming next week. Oath of the Gatewatch is in full swing. We'll see you then.
So one of the things people mentioned when in our year-end show not 2 weeks ago now, is that I was I was overlooking a great natural resource that I have at my disposal, and that is, of course, the the antics of one Ben Stark, since he is one of the more ridiculous people I've come into contact with. Because I mentioned, Shahar has provided a lot of great stories, and we're forever indebted to him for that. I guess I gave him one of the Limmy Awards for best
Limmys. Forgot about the
most
Limmys.
valuable contributor sign-offs.
Yeah,
but. It'd be unfair to Ben to not mention some of the things that he has done. Two of the most enduring stories for me with Ben are, the first one is the night before Pro Tour Paris, when Ben showed up having not tested at all because he just couldn't make it or whatever, and he was deciding which deck to play. And the two decks we had, one was Cobblade. This is the deck with Stoneforge Mystic, Jace, not Batterskull, the swords, and Squadron Hawk and whatnot. And then the other was this...
AKA one of the best standard decks ever.
Right, it got multiple cards banned and ended up being one of the best standard decks ever seen. The other was this deck with Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas, and Kuldotha, Forge Master, and Blightsteel Colossus. And Ben was really going back and forth. He's like, I haven't played much. Which deck should I play? And I'm like, look, the Kuldotha Forge Master deck doesn't know if it wants 4 Preordain or 4 Jace. That's their last slot. They haven't decided which one to play. First of all, you should be playing both. It's insane not to. Second of all, our Cobblade deck is very well tested. We're playing both these cards. It's great. And he's like, you put it that way, it doesn't make any sense at all. And then he wins the Pro Tour. Actually, he's beating me on the way. And I'm just like, wow, why did I tell Ben this? So he beat me in like round 13 or something like that. But,
oh, God, that is so great.
I remember telling Ben that, like, look at these two things. He just looked at him and it's like a light bulb went off in his head. But the funnier story was from Grand Prix, I believe it was Houston, where he's X1 going to the last draft pod. So he's like 11 and
really good shape for top 8.
He has to go 2-1 and potentially 1-1-1 to make top 8. And the draft pod's about to start, and I get a call from Ben. I called him because people were like, "Where's Ben?" And he's like, "I'm running. I'm trying to find my way back." I'm like, "What did you do?" He's like, "Well, I went to look for a Subway." He's obsessed with Subway. He's like, "I went to look for a Subway and I got lost." I'm like, "Well, are you going to make it back?" He's like, I don't know how to get back. I'm just running in a random direction. I'm like, "Why don't you use your phone?" He's like, "I don't have time for that." And he hangs up and just doesn't show up for like another hour. He ended up missing the draft and, being forced to 0-3 the draft pod, finished in the top 50 because his record was still very good.
God, I remember that because I wasn't there. I wasn't doing coverage at the time. I hadn't yet, but I remember on Twitter, people were like, "Has anybody seen Ben Stark? Where's Ben Stark?"
He literally got lost looking for a Subway and then didn't have time, quote, to use his phone and was just running in random directions.
Oh, that's so great. So, that pretty much encapsulates him in a nutshell.
That's actually just Ben Stark in a nutshell.
Yeah, I have a quick Ben Stark story as well. When we were in Vegas last summer for the World Series and for the GPs and stuff, we were rooming together, and I had rented a car, and he wanted to go somewhere, and he's like, "Can I borrow the rental car?" I'm like, "Sure." So he takes off. Now Ben is a really fair, genuine person. He's very straightforward. And when he thinks something's right, he will do it. And he figured that he would put some gas in the car, which is great. I mean, what a nice thing to do, right? So he pulls over and he's at the gas station, but he can't figure out how to open the gas cap. So he starts sending me text messages about how do I open the gas cap on the rental car, and it culminates with me saying, "There's a switch in the door." And so he sends me a picture of the door from his phone that says, "I don't see the switch," and I'm like, "Dude, it's under the handle or whatever." And we literally had 5 texts back and forth because he couldn't figure out how to open the door on the little gas door. It's just like, this is just too good. It's just like, he tries so hard,
Look, all I know is the more people I meet, like Ben or Shahar or myself, the more you
are definitely on this list, by the way.
People only have a limited number of points, and in order to become, in Ben's case, for example, one of the best limited players of all time, let's just say he used up a lot of points.